One of the worst crime scenes I've ever seen in my policing career.
Our Father, who art in heaven.
It went to number 1
hallowed be thy
in the
name.
charts.
Thy kingdom come, thy will
He
be done
had a problem
on earth
with
as it
religion.
is in heaven.
I swear
day
I had
daily
nothing to do
forgive
with
us
this
our
situation.
trespasses,
A disco version of
forgive
it.
those who
Like doom,
trespass
doom,
against
doom,
us.
doom. What?
And lead us not into temptation,
I was beyond
deliver us
saving.
from evil. For thine is the kingdom,
We have reached the end
glory
spiritually
forever.
and financially,
Amen.
and now we go to God. And I just don't want to feel like I am hiding anymore.
Father, who art in heaven,
I just wasn't allowed
be thy name.
to be depressed.
Kingdom come, thy will be done.
Her body
Earth
was
as it
laid
is in heaven.
on the altar.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those
Welcome
who
to
trespass against us.
Extraordinary Stories
And lead us
podcast,
not into temptation.
the religion series.
From evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, gather round. I'm going to tell you a story.
Hey, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. What the hell's going on here then? Would be a good question right about now. Well, allow me to explain. So, a little while ago, I did a short series called the Survivor Series, which I thoroughly enjoyed doing. And it appears you enjoyed hearing the Survivor Series. So if you don't really know my work here on the podcast, sometimes what kind of happens is I will take a fancy to something that fascinates me, and I really like to explore that through stories. In many ways, it's really why the podcast exists, and I have said it before. It's because if something catches my attention in a headline on the news, I need to look at it, think about it, and the way that my brain processes it is often through stories. And they can be sad, shocking, hilariously ridiculous, or just plain fucking weird. It doesn't really matter. So, in a nutshell, there's going to be 5 short series of Extraordinary Stories podcasts dropping, all under one theme at a time. So those themes are religion, love, sex, money, and family. So under each of those themes, there's going to be a number of episodes, and I'll tell a wide variety of stories under each of those themes. Crime stories, life stories, shocking people, incredible people, unbelievable twists, turns, and there'll be the odd swear word, and no doubt the odd song. Anyway, that is enough chit chat from me. Let's just get on with it. A warning. This story contains some brutal and upsetting content. Are you ready? Okay, let's go. So, a while back now, I told you that I had moved to a new city in Scotland for work reasons, and it means that I'm currently living between two cities. So Glasgow is my home, but my new home for work purposes is Dundee. So Dundee is the fourth largest city in Scotland, and it goes by the name the City of Discovery. Ooh, interesting. All the things to discover. What will they be? Who knows? Now, why am I talking about Dundee? Well, when I very first started staying up here, I didn't have anywhere to live, so what was happening was I was just staying in lots of bed and breakfasts, guest houses, sometimes a hotel, and often I would get this advice from people. They would say, stay near the Rose Angle. The what now? I would say, say it again. They say, the Rose Angle. Right, well, what's that then? Well, it's an area that's just outside of Dundee city centre. It's just like, if you're in the city centre, you just head west and you hit an area called the Rose Angle. So following that advice, taking that advice from people, I was like, great, okay, it's always good to get advice. I started staying in a few sort of like really cheap like guest houses sort of around the area, and I actually stayed on the street that is called Rose Angle, and it is lovely down that way. It's really, really nice. So to get there, you kind of just, you walk along the what's called the Perth Road, and that's one of Dundee's most vibrant streets. And then you get to this area where you just see a gorgeous little rose garden. And then there's all these lovely statues. And if you follow the sign, it takes you down to the Rose Angle. So you go downhill and you start to pass these incredible big houses. Absolutely gorgeous big structures that were built years and years ago. There's the most beautiful two churches on the Rose Angle. It's just absolutely gorgeous. Now, in like 2019, there's lots of like different apartment complexes on it, but it's just this absolutely stunning area. So one of the guest houses, I will get to the story in a minute, by the way, but I have to tell you this to start with about how I got to the story. So one of the guest houses that I was staying in was on the Rose Angle, past a really nice property, and I'd walked past it a couple of times. I say nice because like the size of it is just incredible. It's just a big massive house, but it's always been boarded up, and it's the only one on the street that's boarded up, and it seems just completely unoccupied. Never really paid much attention to it. Walked on by, that's fine. But I mean, this is a really sought after, expensive part of town to live in. So one night I'm in one of the guest houses, and the landlord, now he was a really nice guy, but he was, oh my God, he was a chatty Charlie. He talked forever. He was, just like a lovely, lovely guy. But the kind of person that if you ask them a question, 17 hours later, you're still getting the answer. And you're like, I literally just asked you where the shop was. And you're now giving me the history of every shop that's ever existed. Thanks very much. Can we move this along? So I said, well, the Rose Angle area seems really nice. I don't know, are rent prices round here really expensive? Or, is it easy to get somewhere to live round here? And he went, it is quite expensive round here, but you know what? And he looked at me and he had this big wide smile on his face, and he went, you could always look at renting number 2 Rose Angle. So he's like looking at me. I didn't know this was a joke, right? He is laughing his head off. Don't understand what he's talking about. So I'm standing there looking like a right fucking plum. So he goes again, you could always look at renting number 2 Rose Angle. And again, I'm just standing there and I'm like, I've got now just like a fake painted on smile. And in my head, I'm thinking to myself, if you say number 2 Rose Angle to me one more time and you don't explain what that is, I might slap you. So, do you want to just get to the point? And he goes, oh, come on, mate. Everybody in Scotland knows about number 2 rose angle. And I'm thinking, right, well, I'm Scottish. I don't know about it. And he went, do you know what? See when you go back up to your room, just Google it. Just Google it. And I went, right, okay. So I did. I read the first few lines of the story of number 2 rose angle. And I said to myself, okay, this has to be an episode for the podcast. Henry Gallagher was a young man who was born and bred in Dundee. So there's lots of different areas to Dundee, and like any city in the world, there's wealthy areas, there's less wealthy areas, and where Henry's family came from was one of the less wealthy sides of the city. Henry was born in 1950. So he lived not too far outside of the city centre, and he was growing up with his family. You know, it was the 60s, it was the 70s, and it was in Dundee. Henry lived with his parents. So he lived with his parents and his younger brother, and they all lived in the same house, and they lived there all of their life. Growing up, the family, they struggled to make ends meet. And yeah, they just didn't have a lot of money. There just wasn't a lot of money around for that family at the time. They were living in a area that was fairly poverty stricken. So Henry and his brother, well, they spent a lot of time outside, you know, playing football, kicking a ball about, playing hide and seek with their friends, all that sort of stuff. So they knew the city. They knew the city really well. They knew where the Rose Angle was. They also knew that the Rose Angle was for wealthy professionals, and that a lot of clergymen and people associated with the church lived in that area. So as a young boy, and then into a sort of growing teenager, Henry went a bit off the rails. He would get really, really hot-headed and angry about things, and his temper would just fly sometimes. Now, it's something that people around Henry just got used to. There's Henry. He gets really angry about stuff. He just goes a bit fucking mental sometimes and just starts to punch you and just gets a wee bit over agitated, and then he'll calm down. The next minute he'll absolutely calm down, but when he's in that hot-headedness, it's quite scary. It's quite terrifying to be around him. So him and his brother, they were quite... Police knew who these brothers were, because there was many a time as a teenager that Henry had been picked up for trying to break into someone's house, and sometimes with him and his brother it was being picked up for theft, so shoplifting, trying to steal people's bags, purses, all that. Now, if it just stopped there, that would be fine. But it didn't. And this is the first in the religion series. So let's talk about Henry and religion. So first of all, his surname is Gallagher, and it's an old Irish name. And I'm going to guess, I can't be 100% certain, but I'm going to guess, from what I know of names, that Henry's family were a Catholic family. What part religion played in Henry's life, as in his day-to-day life, and, you know, his sort of growing up, isn't known. But what I do know is this. As he became a young man, he had a deep connection to religion, and in some way, it's his actions, his hideous, and I will warn you, they are hideous and horrifying acts which prove that somewhere in Henry there was an association with religion. So in 1972, Henry was aged 22, and he was moving on from theft and burglary, and he was turning his hand to violence. Remember I said he could just literally snap, or he could just get something in his head and just not be able to fucking calm down. Well, this happened in his hometown of Dundee in 1972. And the victim was Henry's local church minister, an elderly man who had served the church for years. Something had made Henry angry, and the local minister was going to be the person to pay for that. So as the elderly minister closed up the church after a big Sunday service, he was locking the big back door when Henry approached him and without warning began to attack him. Now this man was in his late 70s and he had no fight to give against 22-year-old Henry, who was just right up on him, beating him, punching him, kicking him to the ground. This guy did not know what the hell was happening. Where the fuck was this coming from? But there was Henry kicking hell out of his local minister. And so, beating done, Henry leaves the churchyard, he runs away, and he leaves the old man lying on the ground. What a bastard. Now the question is, why this minister? Why this attack? And you know what? That question cannot be answered. That no one knows. But what I do know, and what I can tell you, is that this is only the very beginning of a very, very dark path for Henry. So that was 1972. And he was never charged with the crime. The old minister, he recovered in hospital, but he gave up his role in the church after the attack. So 3 years pass, and Henry's finding himself in more trouble, more thefts, more burglaries, but he's never brought to account for that attack. And in 1975, Henry finds himself not in Dundee, but in Stockton, which is in England. And so he's there, right, to visit a friend for the weekend. And during the weekend, he stops a stranger on the street and he asks, out of curiosity, where is the nearest church? So once he's pointed in the direction, Henry walks there, looks around, sees what's going on, and he waits. He waits until the vicar in the church is alone and vulnerable. At which point he repeats the exact same style of attack as he did on the minister 3 years before. Once there, pointed in the direction of the church, Henry goes there and he waits. He waits and he watches. He waits until the vicar who is in the church is alone and vulnerable. At which point, Henry sneaks up on him and he begins to attack the priest. He begins to punch him in the face. He begins to kick him in the stomach until the priest is lying down on the ground. Now, this was a priest in his 60s, going about his business, not bothering anyone. It's just insane. He didn't know Henry. This priest did not know Henry from Adam. See what I did there? Slipped in a wee religious joke to try and lighten the mood. This priest, he was able to identify Henry to police, but it was useless by now. Henry was long gone. He was gone from England. He was back to Dundee. So now, I think it's this point in the story. I think you need to stop and say what the actual fuck is going on here. So far, 2 members of the church have been viciously beaten. But, I mean, this is me trying to find any kind of rhyme or reason or anything. In the first, right, the one in Dundee with the minister, I could say, well, you know, at least he lived in the same area as Henry. You know, there might have been the smallest grain of motivation there for something. You know, I mean, like often when you're at school and you're young and whatever, you know, the minister might play a part. I mean, I know certainly the minister in the place that I grew up played a part. He used to come to school every Friday and you'd hear a sermon and, you know, whatever and all those things. So, you know, maybe from like 8 years old, Henry just hated that particular man. Maybe he just had a thing and it was just like, oh, I hate that man, and one day I'm going to grow up to be an adult, a big fucking bully adult, and I'm going to walk up when the man is completely vulnerable and attack him, right? That's just that. I'm just theorising. That's you know, that could all be complete bullshit. But the second one baffles me because I'm like, it was an entirely different part of the UK. This was a man that Henry knew nothing about. He didn't know him. Why would you just attack a priest out of nowhere? It's very, very odd, but something is driving him. And if you're a detective at this point, you would have to be going, he clearly has feelings of hatred towards the church or people who are associated with the church. I don't know, is it childhood? Is it fear? Is he doing it out? I don't know. It's so confusing. What happens now is Henry's behaviour, it begins to escalate. His crimes begin to change. And so we've gone, if we look at it, we've gone through theft. We've had burglary. We've now had 2 different attacks on religious men. So where does it go next? In 1979, Henry breaks into a house in Dundee, intending to rob the property, as the family, they're not home. He knows this because he's been watching the property. But what he doesn't know is that the family dog is at home. The family dog is immediately alerted to the presence of an intruder. Henry gets into a rage. Press the skip button now if you don't want to hear this next bit. Go ahead and press the 15-second skip button on your podcast app, on your wherever you are. Press the 15-second skip if you don't want to hear what Henry does to this dog. In a rage, he grabs the dog. He pulls out a knife and he slits the dog's throat, killing it instantly. I'll refer you to my earlier statement. What a bastard. Now, I know that the dog and the burglary has nothing to do with religion, but what I'm trying to show you is Henry is getting more and more dangerous. And so let's pause and ask, why did I start with this whole Dundee business? The whole Rose angle, the whole number 2 Rose angle chat. Why start there? I'll tell you why. It's 1980. Henry is 30 years old. He's living in Dundee. A good few years have passed from the minister, the priest, and the dog. Now, it's a sunny, bright Saturday afternoon in the city of Discovery. And people are out and about. They're shopping, they're having fun, they're meeting friends. It's a lovely, lovely day. So now, just across from number 2 Rose Angle, there's a sort of like grassy area, and it's quite big, and it's where 4 boys happen to be just playing some football. So 4 young boys, they're just kicking a ball about, and one of them, they kick the ball accidentally into the garden of number 2 Rose Angle. So, the boy goes to collect the ball. His pals are taking the piss out of him for being such a bad shot. And it's when he's in the garden, he collects the ball and he thinks, do you know what I'll do? I'll just take a wee sneaky peek into the big posh house. And when he does, he sees the most horrific sight. The husband and wife who own this house have been slaughtered in their own living room. And when I say slaughtered, I mean it. Blood covers the walls. Blood is all over the furniture, all over the carpets. The 2 victims are Dr. Alexander Wood and his wife Dorothy, both 78 years old. Dr. Wood had been a very, very well respected doctor in the Dundee area, and him and his wife Dorothy, they were loved in the community. People loved them. They were just such a lovely couple. And importantly, really importantly, they both played an absolutely massive role in the church and in the church community. Number 2 Rose Angle had been their family home. It's where that they intended to live out until their very dying days. But they didn't know that their dying days would be sooner than expected. They didn't know that Henry Gallagher was going to stop by with a hammer and bludgeon them both to death. Evidence at the scene was able to show that Dorothy had attempted to defend herself against the attacker, but she was a 78-year-old woman trying to defend a man with a hammer in her living room. So there were 2 sofas in the living room, and it's a big, huge room. So Dr. Alexander was on one, Dorothy was on the other, and it's believed that Henry came from the back of the house and completely surprised them in the living room. Their bodies lay almost unrecognisable from the hammer marks on their face. Dr. Alexander, he was a very, very frail man, and he couldn't really move much. His wife spent most of her time caring for him, so he stood no chance against them. Dorothy, as I said, I think had tried to put up some sort of a fight, but hadn't won that fight. The scene left in the living room was described as one of the most horrific murder scenes that you could ever see. So when police arrived, they had been alerted by the boys who were playing football. They walked into that, and Senior Officer Jim Campbell, Big Jim Campbell, who had been an officer for many years, said, "It's the most awful thing I have ever witnessed." So the scene of the crime, it was widely described and discussed in the news, and it was talked about in shops, on the streets, in pubs. The sheer shock of it went on for months. Number 2 Rose Angle was boarded up by the family immediately to keep out prying eyes, because the press were like really wanting photographs of that living room. They really wanted to see that, but police were like, no, we're not letting those images go out there. People were then, and are still now, desperate to get inside Number 2 Rose Angle, and I'll come to that in a minute. Let's get to what did Henry do after the crime. Well, he fled Dundee and he headed south. Why? Well, 2 reasons. First of all, just to run away. But second of all, to confess. Confess to police? Oh no. Oh no. Henry wanted to confess his sins to a member of the clergy. He wanted to unburden himself of his sins, and he thought that the best way to do that was to just go and tell a priest what he had done. Okay. I mean, take a step back from that. Take a step back from the madness of that. You've just killed 2 people who are associated with the church, and you have a history of attacking people in the church, and now what you want to do is you want to confess those sins to a priest. Okay. I mean, we are obviously dealing with mental health issues, but he's still on this religious obsession. He's got this history of hatred, and now he's seeking help from the church. Right, so he goes to Kent in England. When he gets there, he looks for the first church that he can find. He sees it and it's closed, but the house next to it, it has its lights on. So it's this little, like, quaint, very small, English-looking house. Fine. And in this house lived Father Edward Hull, who was 88 years old. He was a Benedictine monk. So, Father Hull lived there with Maud, his housekeeper. Maud, what a name. Maud was 73 years old. So the 2 of them, they lived in this wee house. That was fine. So when the door gets knocked, Maud, she gets up to answer the door. She goes, and there's a man standing on her doorstep. She's never seen him before, but he's saying, "I need help." He says, "I need to speak to someone." And Maud says, okay. In you come. He's introduced to Father Edward. And Maud, she goes into the kitchen to make the stranger a cup of tea. When Maud comes back into the living room and she puts down the tea, she realises something is very wrong with the elderly Father Edward. Now, Father Edward was 88, but he was, as my mum would say, sharp as a tack, meaning bright, smart, quick to react. You know, he wasn't an old 88-year-old man who had, sort of gone into himself in that way. He was still actually very able. He was still very bright. He could still understand everything that was going on around him. He was really on the ball. But Maud, the housekeeper, she'd lived with him for years, and she knew from the look in his face something was not right. Now, what she worked out is the thing that's not right here can only be the Scottish man in the living room causing a disturbance. I think maybe, now I've just heard myself say that, I think maybe that's how I would quite like to be described in my life. I think I'd quite like to be the Scottish man in the living room causing a disturbance. I think that could probably be a review of my life. So, reading Father Hull's face, she's really concerned. And rightly so. Had Henry just confessed his crimes to the father? The attacks on the priests, the minister, and the murders at Roseangle. Father Edward, he reacted with horror. And that completely enraged Henry Gallagher. Now, I don't get why that enraged him, because what the fuck was he expecting? Anyone would be horrified. Anybody. A priest, minister, father, monk, anybody. Don't care. They're going to be shocked if you say to them, I have literally just bludgeoned 2 people to death with a hammer. To be met with shock seemed to really upset Henry Gallagher. What does the shock do? Well, it makes him furious. He grabs Father Hull's walking stick and he begins to beat him repeatedly. When Maud, the housekeeper, she tries to intervene, she too is beaten. Henry Gallagher, James beats them both until... And I quote from a police report. The room looked like an abattoir. Father Hull, he died in the living room, bleeding to death. And Maud died 4 days later in the hospital. They had been found by a concerned neighbour the following morning. So by this time, Henry Gallagher, James is long gone. Now, a nationwide manhunt is underway. Police had a kind of idea that they might be looking for the same person who committed the crimes in Roseangle and these murders, but they weren't quite sure, they just couldn't quite put all the pieces together. So this was 4 people dead in a matter of days. But Henry Gallagher wasn't finished. Leaving his latest crime scene, he went to York. Now York's in England as well. And he goes around, and he's walking the streets, asking the people, where is the nearest vicarage? He wanted to visit some vicars. Oh man. At this point in the story, it's like, just catch him. Please, just catch him. Please, before he goes into a vicarage and causes more death and more fucking destruction. But catch him they do. And I'll tell you why. Those vicars in York, they were no dafties. When Henry Gallagher knocked on the door, he said he needed help, so they invited him in. But Immediately, these men went, something isn't right here. We have a very bad feeling. So police arrived, and within an hour, Henry Gallagher was in police custody and was ready for arrest. Henry Gallagher was charged with the murders at number 2 Rosangle and for the deaths of Father Hull and Maud. He confessed. But he gave no motive. He refused to say why he killed them and what his dark hatred of the church was. And now this is where this case sits in a very unique position. There was no trial. Henry Gallagher never stood in front of a judge. There was no courtroom. There was no jury to hear the crimes and then rest to deliberate. He was charged but never tried. After his confession, he was immediately examined by a medical professional who immediately recommended he be sent to Broadmoor, the high security psychiatric hospital in England. And it's there that he was taken. So from this, police were able to put together all of James's crimes, from the attacks years ago to the 4 murders, and yet they could not get to the why. He would never say. He would say, yes, I did it. But never would he say why. Why the insane hatred of the church? And that's really the question that hangs over the whole story. Henry Gallagher was taken to Broadmoor and he was placed into high security indefinitely. So where are we now? Right, the house. Number 2 Rosangle. The house that I stayed 100 yards away from and had no idea of the fucking story that happened in it. Well, it remains boarded up. It was bought for nearly £500,000. Wowzers. From a man from Edinburgh. And although he bought the property, he hasn't done anything with the property. But here's the problem. If you go on to various internet searches, or if you look up on YouTube, like the spookiest murder scenes in the UK, or creepy houses to visit, Scotland or whatever, you'll find that this house comes up again and again. And what was starting to happen was people were sneaking into it and filming themselves and putting it up online. Now, bear in mind, that house was shut down when those murders happened. You know, that was a long time ago. That was 1985. That is an old house that's been boarded up for a long time. But people were making a kind of game out of going, I'm going to try and sneak into Rosangle. Oh, it's going to be brilliant. And the guy who bought it, well, he's fucking furious. And I kind of get his point here. He says, since the day those murders happened, that house hasn't been touched, and inside it's falling to bits. It's not safe. So people who think it's daring to go into the murder house are idiots. It's dangerous. I see what he's saying, but it begs the question for me, why did you buy it, mate? You've never done anything with it. Why would you buy? I don't think, like, if I had that amount of money, or if I was suddenly to come into a lot of money, I don't think first on my list would be a murder house. I don't think I'd be like, I must look around for what's the creepiest house where someone died really brutally and buy it. I don't know. A Scottish newspaper reported last year that it's going to be turned into a trendy bar. It's going to become one of these, like, trendy West End hangout places. Ooh, lots of cocktails. Ooh, serves food. And it's going to be called Number 2 Rose Angle. Believe me, if that happens, you're going to find me at the bar because I am going to want to be in that building. Well, a retired police officer who had worked on the case as it happened asked years later, and I think it was about the year 2000, if, that was a long time after the crimes, he asked if he could go to Broadmoor. That permission was granted. So he gets there and he sits down and he interviews Henry Gallagher. He describes it as tense and strange. He says Henry Gallagher was going from being lucid at moments to then just being extremely aggressive. It was as if he just wanted to stop the interview. Then, a short time later, Henry Gallagher calmed down completely, and he asked the retired police officer to come back and continue the conversation as if it was all perfectly normal. When they discussed the crime and the crime scene, he said Henry Gallagher didn't really seem to get that agitated about it. He seemed to play it down as if it was, nothing to really talk about. That crime scene was, nothing to really be worried about. But what's really interesting is this retired police officer who worked on it said he was trying to play it down, but I saw that room. The police officer brought up the subject that some might say the crime had been left unresolved. That people, quite rightly, wanted him back in Scotland to stand trial for his crimes. And Henry Gallagher replied with this. Okay, there are many people who say I should have hanged. But is there really any satisfaction in that? I was caught. I confessed. And most importantly, I was placed where I should be because I am beyond saving. Totally incurable. Justice was done. I find that last line so interesting. It's one of the very first things I loved and read about this story. Him saying, I was beyond saving. There's something that sounds biblical for me in that statement. Maybe not to everyone else, but to me it sounds biblical. I was beyond saving. Henry Gallagher has spent 38 years in Broadmoor Psychiatric Unit, where he will live until he dies. And so ends the story. Okay, well, there you go. Number 1 in the religion series. I'm going to do my best, right, to try and get a photo of me outside of the Rose Angle, Number 2 Rose Angle, and just be like, selfie of me outside of that house, just to show you what you can Google it, you can look at it, you can see whatever, but yeah. So that's the end of episode 1 in the religion series. I hope you enjoyed it. Get on to the next as soon as you can. If you want to get in touch, you know where to. Come to the Facebook group, contact me through Facebook, through Twitter, through Instagram, email me extraordinarystoriespodcast@gmail.com, send me a pigeon in the sky, you'll find me, okay? if you want to get in touch, it would be lovely to hear from you. Okay, until the next episode. Okay, goodbye.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other. I would imagine from the look on his face, let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over. Let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over.